Israel releases images of Palestinians suspected of Hamas involvement as the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsens. Armenia and Azerbaijan say they're working towards normalizing their relations in a move welcomed by the European Union and the United States.
President Zelensky addresses G7 members and the Ukrainian parliament ahead of crucial talks on EU negotiations.
Images released by Israel of Palestinian men stripped to their underwear and sitting on the ground in northern Gaza, heads bowed. The army claims it's detained hundreds of people who are being interrogated for suspected involvement in Hamas activity. The exact circumstances and dates of the detentions are unclear.
בג'באליה ובסג'איה אלה מרכזי כובד, אלה גם מחנות פליטים של מחבלים ואנחנו נלחמים בהם. הם מתחבאים מתחת לאדמה ויוצאים החוצה ואנחנו נלחמים. חלק מהלחימה הזאת גם מי שנשאר במרחב הזה הולך ויוצא החוצה, חלקו מפירים, חלקו גם מהבתים. אנחנו חוקרים ובודקים מי מקושר לחמאס ומי לא.
Israeli soldiers, meanwhile, celebrated Hanukkah, an important religious holiday, as the army continues its bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Heavy fighting has continued through central and northern parts of the Palestinian enclave. At this vast displacement camp in Rafah in the south, like elsewhere in Gaza, humanitarian aid efforts are crumbling due to intense fighting. The United Nations says hunger among refugees is no longer a warning, but a reality, with most families not getting adequate amounts of food each day. And UNICEF says the Gaza Strip is once again the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. With the winter coming, they don't have enough warm clothing and blankets or food and other basic needs. Longtime enemies Armenia and Azerbaijan say they're working towards normalizing their relations, a move welcomed by the European Union and the United States. After 3 decades of conflict over disputed territory, they reconfirmed their intention to sign a peace treaty. On Thursday, the two countries issued a joint statement saying there was an historical chance to achieve long-awaited peace in the region. Azerbaijan waged a military campaign in the separatist region of Nagorno-Karabakh in September. The offensive ended 3 decades of rule there by ethnic Armenians and resulted in most of its residents fleeing the region, which is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. As part of the normalization process, the two countries agreed to exchange prisoners of war and to continue discussions on confidence-building measures. As a gesture, Armenia also agreed to lift its objections to Azerbaijan hosting the UN Climate Change Conference next year.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he expects crucial votes for the parliament by the end of the week, mainly focusing on several decisions concerning the start of negotiations with the EU. Addressing G7 leaders, Zelensky hoped Ukraine would join the bloc sooner rather than later.
Ukraine has fulfilled the European Commission's recommendations, and by the end of this year, we will adopt all the decisions we promised. And we hope that the European Union will also fulfill its promise to Ukraine. The decision to start association negotiation with the EU is a powerful energy for us, the energy of unity.
France's President Emmanuel Macron has met with one of Ukraine's main obstacles, Hungary's Viktor Orban. The Prime Minister says promising Ukraine possible EU accession is a mistake, and he is against the passing of another big aid package, crucial to Ukraine after the US Senate failed to pass their own. As troops try to keep warm in freezing conditions, Russia continues to target power infrastructures in Ukraine. The EU has proven vital to providing electricity to the country when needed.
Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world following its invasion of Ukraine. But some critical items, such as cars as well as household appliances like washing machines, dishwashers, microwaves, which include microchip and semiconductors used to make drones, munitions and other lethal hardware, are making their way onto the battlefield in Ukraine despite being prohibited from sale to Russia. It appears that companies in Turkey, Kazakhstan, Armenia, China and others, countries which are not aligning with EU sanctions, have been supplying Russia with these items. The job of the EU sanctions envoy, David O'Sullivan, is to use diplomatic pressure to persuade countries not to circumvent Western sanctions.
Purely issue. I think we have to be realistic. There's always going to be a degree of circumvention. There's money to be made. A lot of these products have all previously been sold to other countries and are kind of out there on the free market. But I think our main objective, and in this I think we are succeeding, is to make it harder, to make it slower, and to make it more expensive for Russia to access these products. So every time we shut off one avenue, a new one has to be developed, and I think that's our objective, is progressively to make it harder, slower and much more expensive for Russia to be able to procure this.
He also says that while Russia is getting access to some critical pieces, Western efforts are working in hampering Russia's ability to replenish its military machinery.
I mean, there are things that have a perfectly innocent civilian application in normal circumstances, but also they are largely made with US or EU technology. They are not easily replicated in other countries. So it is hard for Russia to get them as we cease to export them and as we persuade countries, intermediary countries, no longer to re-export them to Russia. And I think, yes, we do see some evidence that it's getting much more difficult, and they are using substitute products, sometimes of Chinese origin, but which are inferior quality, to be frank. So this is giving the Ukrainian military a certain technological advantage on the battlefield.
The EU's sanctions envoy insists that sanctions are working as they're slowly hampering Russia's war effort, but warns it'll take time and commitment to ensure they pay off. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
Hunter Biden, son of US President Joe Biden, is facing 9 new criminal charges. Prosecutors on Thursday accused him of failing to pay some 1.3 million euros of federal taxes between 2016 and 2019, while spending money on a lavish lifestyle. In the 56-page indictment filed in California, he was hit with 3 felony and 6 misdemeanor tax offences. If convicted, he faces up to 17 years in prison. And he could now be facing 2 criminal trials next year as his father runs for re-election. Denmark has adopted a law criminalising what it describes as the inappropriate treatment of religious texts. The controversial bill effectively bans the burning of the Quran in public places, and its approval comes after a spate of protests over the summer, during which Islam's holy book was burnt. The bill has been criticised for sacrificing freedom of expression, but Copenhagen has tried to strike a balance between free speech and national security, amid fears such acts could trigger Islamist attacks. Residents of Mexico City rushed to the streets on Thursday after an earthquake jolted the central regions of the country. Measuring 5.8 on the Richter scale, it struck in the early afternoon when many people were still at work. As earthquake alarms blared across the city and buildings shook, people ran out of offices and their homes to wait anxiously on the streets. The epicenter was in a rural village some 150 kilometers south of the capital. There were no immediate reports of damage or injuries.
With sparkling illuminations and musical notes echoing across the city, Lyon's annual light festival wowed residents and tourists alike. Its 32 light displays sent messages about protecting the environment, human connection, and the future of artificial intelligence.
C'est une bonne idée d'utiliser l'IA et d'en faire quelque chose de beau et de montrer que c'est cool ce qu'il peut y avoir, et la musique est super parce que c'est Rhône en plus.
L'année dernière, ils avaient déjà utilisé l'IA pour faire chanter les tableaux du musée des Beaux-Arts qui est juste derrière. Et cette année, ils ont recommencé, mais là avec l'héritage des Frères Lumière, et ça c'est très bon.
Spectators watched the show huddled in the cold and chatted with friends near stands selling snacks and mulled wine.
C'est toujours un moment hyper convivial, en famille, entre amis. C'est toujours des nouveautés et super chouette.
C'est la première fois que je viens pour assister donc à ce festival et ça nous a plu. Artistiquement parlant, c'est très, très, très joli. Et puis le message aussi, je crois, qui est intéressant.
festival is also extending beyond the city center to connect with more residents.
Pour nous, c'est très important que des gens puissent venir en centre-ville pour voir la fête des Lumières, mais aussi d'aller vers les gens, vers les habitants.
C'est un spectacle qu'on a fabriqué avec les habitants et les habitantes. C'est un spectacle qui a une grande histoire, en fait, c'est un voyage super optimiste, humain, à travers différents tableaux qu'on a réfléchis avec les habitants et les habitantes.
One of this year's works was even developed by a well-known French singer who wants to bring people closer with his family of pink figurines.
Ce sont des êtres sculptés qui n'arrivent pas à communiquer, et le fait qu'il y ait des gens qui les voient, c'est-à-dire qu'il y aura apparemment beaucoup de gens qui vont les observer, ces personnages. Ils jouent aussi avec la lumière, avec la musique, et c'est l'idée qu'avec tous ces éléments, ils puissent enfin communiquer.
This year's works included lights projected onto trees, an enchanted fountain, and 3,500 mirrors. Artists played with themes such as connection, nature, and dreams, and spectators in awe responded with applause. This is Lauren Chadwick reporting for Euronews.